I'm Joyce Hornady. You might say accuracy is my business. I make bullets.
You are listening to the Hornady Podcast.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning back into the Hornady Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Swerzik. Thanks for tuning in on this one. I'm joined today, right beside me, Judge Yerzinka. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you. I'm excited about this one. Before letting any cats out of the bag, it's right up my alley.
It's right up your alley, as we've collectively called you in the office a whitetail elitist. But all jokes aside, mule deer, whitetail deer, axis deer, doesn't matter. Deer is what really makes the clock go around. It makes the world go around here at Hornady. Obviously, there's a lot of hunting, but deer hunting, it all comes back to that's just so much involvement. So many people can do it. Bars of entry are pretty low. And, man, you want to talk about a passion. It creeps up on you. Next thing you know, you're spending 9 months out of your year daydreaming about opening morning.
Yeah, I think it's more than 9 months.
Yeah.
It's 24/7, 365. Yeah.
Right. Well,
yeah, big time.
Without further ado, then, let's welcome our special guest for the show, Dan Schmidt. Dan, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. This has been a special day, and I'm really glad to join you guys today.
Yeah. So, Dan, you join us via Wisconsin, and you're working with deer and deer hunting, and we work with that brand. Hornady works with that brand, but your knowledge and passion for deer goes way deeper than that, and the education and, like I said, the knowledge and passion, where it all comes together, you end up with a fanatic.
Absolutely, that's guilty as charged there. It's been, and I have to start off by saying, Hornady has been with us with our TV show from the beginning. Deer and deer hunting started the whitetail industry. I don't know if you guys know that. It
did not.
Started as a stump sitters in 1973. Stump Sitters Whitetail Study Group. It was the first whitetail-specific organization in America, and then they just took logbooks from guys because they wanted to learn how to hunt better.
Yeah.
And the guys, after 3.5 years, they said, "Do we not get like a newsletter or something for giving you our $10?" And they came up with a newsletter, and it would have been, the first one came out in March of 1977, and they're sitting at the founder's kitchen table, and he said, "What are we going to call this?" I said, "This was the first SEO research before SEO was even a thing." He said, "Well, it's going to be about deer, and it's going to be about deer hunting. Why don't we call it deer and deer hunting?" So that's how it started. I'm going to give you a short, kind of long background on my intro. It would have been in April of 1981. I'm going to date myself here. I was in 8th grade at a Catholic grade school in southern Wisconsin, and our English teacher asked us to write a theme paper as to what we wanted to do when we grew up.
Oh boy!
And I wrote, I wanted to be the editor of Deer and Deer Hunting magazine. So it took a long time. I went through college, went through journalism school, worked in newspapers for 3.5 years. If anybody remembers what a newspaper is,
Mm-hmm.
And I know you do, but
Yeah.
and it took me a long time. I got my foot in the door in 1994, and I've been there ever since. And I started at the ground level, worked my way up. But now we eventually, the corporation, it was corporate America in New York City that actually owned it after a while, and we were just a small piece of that portfolio. That corporation went bankrupt in 2019, and Brad Rux, who's the president of the company, I'm the vice president, we rounded up other investors, bought the brand, brought it back to its roots, and it's our company's Media 360.
Okay.
And Deer Hunting is a flagship brand for that. But it's fed my passion almost my entire career.
How about that?
And I've just been a whitetail fanatic ever since I can remember. And for me, it's been, I grew up in a construction family. My dad was a carpenter, and he said, "You don't have it so bad. You just get to talk about deer hunting all day long."
Yep.
You know that there's other stresses involved in running a business. But in a nutshell, that's where my background came with, just being all the way deeply seated in my psyche all the way back to grade school.
Yeah, that's a pretty neat story. You set your sights high and delivered.
Achieved it, and now own a part of the company. It's very satisfying. What is nice about it is it was, quote unquote, just a print magazine, 100,000 plus circulation. It set the bar in media for whitetail hunting, but now we've expanded the TV show. Like I said, we're on Pursuit Channel. We've also have 3 other television shows. We've got numerous online videos, numerous online series.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Bartell's Grown Big, Hunt 'em Big. I think you're familiar with those.
Yeah, we
Judd.
were talking about those earlier. I
Yeah.
was a big Steve Bartilla fan, and
Yeah.
I still am. But yeah, he used to put out all kinds of content all the time, and I really enjoyed his
And he does.
his knowledge.
Yes.
But his delivery,
Yeah.
I don't know, it just pulled me in. I enjoyed watching
Yeah,
his
I've known
videos.
Steve for a long time. He's been a contributor for a long time. He owns part of the company. And it's basically what's nice about that. It's kind of the same thing that you guys have here at Hornady. You're all active shooters, whether
Mhm.
you're a hunter or whether you're a shooter. One way or the other, everybody who works for obviously our company is much smaller scaled.
Sure.
But everybody has that passion, which really, it doesn't matter if you're in the hunting industry, if you're in a career where everybody has that same passion.
Mm-hmm.
I know it sounds cliche, but it isn't work. If you really worked like I did, and I know you guys did growing up, it's not work in the same amount of way. You don't get to the end of the day and hate your job. You love your job, and you might get stressed out.
Yeah, right.
But
There's a
at the same
difference.
time, there's a huge difference when you know that you're doing something that other people find passionate.
Yeah.
And you can see that in their eyes. And for me, it'll be 29 years, and that doesn't go away. When I see other people who are that, it just recharges you. You're like,
Yeah.
they're about as excited about this as I still am.
And it shines through on your product.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, in your world, in our world, as far as our products, everybody here, for the majority, is a hunter, is a shooter, want a better product for themselves, and
Yep.
that passion drives them towards that, which in
Yeah.
translation is better product
And
for everybody.
I think it's genuine too, and I think people can see how genuine it really is when you're designing products that aren't just a me too kind of product. We've come out with some bullets like our ELDX bullet, for example, just a phenomenal bullet, arguably the best bullet ever designed and manufactured. I mean, it does so many things so well. And then you've got other companies after we've released that are just trying to play catch up, and I'm not sure that they would have pushed for that type of performance outside of, Hornady's doing it, we got to get something like that too. I think that genuine passion for innovation and product development spurred because we want to use the product.
Right.
We want a better product for you, but really kind of want a better product for me too.
And like they say, the chaff sorts out from the wheat.
Yeah.
Because I've seen that in our industry. I see it with your company. You have passionate people about ammunition. I see it with like Matthews Archery. Matt McPherson started that, and their slogan, you probably remember, is "Catch us if you can," because they were not only innovators, yet people are going to follow.
Mm-hmm.
People are going to copy you, but you keep pushing that. You keep pushing that. That drive. You're trying to achieve excellence.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of, Ted Nugent taught me that over 25 years ago. He says, ignore your haters. And if somebody tries to copy you, it's kind of a compliment.
Yeah.
And it does annoy you. I mean, if there are people that are trying to do that, but I think that is the tenet of a good business in general, but especially like in our industry, it's something you can wear as a badge of honor.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's talk a little bit about kind of your specialty. Obviously, on the journalism side, there's that. But when you've dedicated your life to deer hunting, you've had to pick up a thing or two regarding behavior and land management and food plots and all the things that go into, a lot of us get infected with this hunting bug, and then next, you're reading magazines about how to manage your land, or what moon phase to be hunting in, and does the moon matter anymore, and how to hunt with the wind. And what have you learned over your last 30 years doing this that translates to?
That's a great question. So what I did, and this I think goes from my upbringing. I was born a Christian Catholic family, and my dad and my elders, they beat it into my head, and I don't mean that to sound derogatory, but they always say, respect your elders and learn from your elders. And when I got into this industry, I didn't know hardly anything. I was a passionate deer hunter. I loved it. But there was a couple men that I'd have to tip my hat to. Two of them already passed. Leonard Lee Rue, the third from New Jersey. He was the first deer behaviorist.
Okay.
It wasn't really a thing. He was a photographer, incredible photographer, and most of those early issues of Deer and Deer Hunting were all his photographs. But he learned deer behavior. Well, he passed that along to Charlie Alsheimer from New York. Charlie he was a good friend of mine. He passed away in 2017. He was the preeminent deer behaviorist. He took what Lenny did and took it to another level, because what they did is they photographed deer in controlled environments, but they lived with the deer. And what they did, and the stuff that you and I take for granted, a lot of that is traced back to them.
Mm-hmm.
But then Deer and Deer Hunting's forte was science-based research. So what they did back in the 70s, they actually were awarded the top honor from the Wildlife Society, and that would have been, I think, about 1978 or 79. I would have to go back and look. But basically for popularizing science-based research, and it was all whitetail related. So everything we know about, buck home ranges, doe home ranges, doe fawning rates, how the environment dictates that in certain areas, how the habitat dictates, how when you manipulate things, it's God's plan. It's like, you're going to do this, well, here's a card, play that.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically all those things, and then the behavior and the biology, we were relying on people from the various universities. John Ozoga he worked for Michigan DNR, still contributes a little bit to this day. He's well retired. But what I did was I listened. And I think the biggest thing that a younger person could take away in any occupation, don't be that youthfully arrogant punk that think you know it all. Because that guy who might be much more frail than you and a little bit white in the beard, he's been through it, and you see those things. So what I did, and I actually wrote a book about it in, I believe it was 2005. I wrote a book called Whitetail Wisdom. And the book was, everybody says you're being arrogant because this isn't my wisdom. What I'm doing is I'm just regurgitating stuff guys have taught me.
Yeah, you're assembling a whole bunch of different people's wisdom into one form
in
of
one
work.
form.
Yep.
And what I always told, I used to do speaking engagements and for especially young kids and hunters. The first thing I would tell them is, if you're in school, study as much math and science as you can, because I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't have to be a journalist because today I don't know if you could make it as a journalist.
Right.
And the other thing is to accumulate as much of that knowledge as possible.
Yeah.
And how it's helped me is, and this goes back to our founder, Jack Brower, a co-founder of Deer and Deer Hunting and the Stump Sitters, is Jack said, always try to learn something new. And here's another little, I'm going to go on a little sidebar here. So when these guys came up with this idea, they were trying to sell it. So they came up with this magazine, this beautiful magazine. That's when magazines were super popular. Magazine still is. But they went to Fred Bear, and they were at some kind of show. I don't know if it wasn't SHOT Show. It was one of the shows. And Fred said, well, I don't think you got enough there. It's too vertical. It's too vertical of a market. You're going to run out of things to talk about. And Jack said, well, no, we're gonna teach people everything. So today I say that, like, when you're out in the woods, if you want to become a better deer hunter, this is my long way of getting back to what I was trying to say. Jack said, always be questioning everything. So what I would do is, like, you live or shoot a deer, okay? And up by us, a lot of times during gun season especially, we might have a little bit of snow. Mm-hmm. And some of the things that would come to me is like, why is that liver blood like opaque maroonish colored as opposed to whatever? So then I would go, as the editor, I would go to, like, Dr. Ditchkoff at Auburn University and say, why is it? And he goes, well, they mineralize things in their liver differently than in their bloodstream. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But guess what that taught me? Next time I see that colored blood,
you know what you got.
I didn't double lung them.
Yep.
I didn't smoke them. That bullet probably went through the liver. Now I'm like, oh, now I got to, from these other guys who taught me, you probably should back out and wait 4 or 5, 6 hours.
Yep.
So for me, from the way I look at things, is I know I look at it a lot differently. A lot of other hunters might look at, I don't care about that stuff. I just want to kill a big buck.
Yeah.
But for me, that teaches me more about deer. And in that particular instance, does that help me become a better buck hunter? No. But then where did that deer run when I shot him? Well, he just ran through 2 bedding areas. That's going to help me next year and the year after. So then when I started, and by no means am I I don't consider myself a trophy hunter.
Sure.
Big or small, I shoot them all.
Yeah.
That's my slogan. But what it has helped me is I'm very confident that I can assess a property and determine, is this a property that you could hunt a mature buck on? I mean, now today, obviously we've got trail cameras and we've got all this awesome technology that has way shortened that curve.
Yeah.
But it's stuff like that that has really, I think, helped define myself as a whitetail fanatic. Is always questioning the minutia.
Mm-hmm.
Whether and a lot of it comes down to a lot of it's behavior related. And Charlie taught me that, because he taught me if you can read a deer's behavior, you can learn so much more about that topography than you would never learn. He always said, let the deer teach you how to hunt them. And that's what I always did, was like, rather than thinking like, well, here's a trail and I'm going to go off of here and that's got to be the bedding area. He'd say, just absorb all that other information and try to use that to your best advantage. So now, 30 years onto that, and very blessed to have hunted, I don't know how many states. I mean, 42 states have whitetail populations, or I should say reportable whitetail hunting populations. I've probably hunted 30 of them.
Wow.
So, and then when you do that, you're outside that little bubble of your 20 acres at home in the Midwest or the Northeast or whatever, and it gives you that bird's eye view of what might be going on around you.
Yeah. Well, and all of this knowledge, as well as everybody else at Deer and Deer Hunting, that shows through in the content, whether it's a published magazine or on social media or
post
on
or TV show.
But how long has the TV show been
TV
aired?
show is 18 years, David, right? 19 years, sorry.
Wow.
We're going on 19
Wow.
years.
So
And Hornady was right there from the beginning. So we very much, Hornady, Matthews, we've Wildlife Research, we've had 10 point, we've had some, I'm going to miss somebody, so don't box my ears. It's been 19 years on television.
wow.
And we did hop around on some of those bigger networks. We landed with Pursuit quite a while ago, and that has been a perfect partnership, because the way I look at our partnership with Pursuit is it's like this. And I'm not saying
engaged.
I got friends everywhere, but it's a really good mesh.
Awesome.
And we've got a 2-hour block. It's called Saturday Night Deer Camp. We produce 4 television shows for that block. And then we do have, like you mentioned, there's all the online videos and social media stuff and stuff on our website.
Well, Deer and Deer Hunting TV is somewhat unique. I mean, is there another show similar to it as far as, I watch that
It's
show
all
to
aspects.
learn. There is a little bit of entertainment part, but I'm watching to learn.
That's
stuff.
and thank you. I'm glad you say that, because it helps me. It reaffirms to me that these guys are doing their job.
Yeah.
Because when we started the show, our slogan was the deer. I'm not the star of the show. Steve's not the star of the show. Mark Kaiser's not the star of the show. The deer are the star of the show.
Yep.
And I think the average hunter appreciates that.
Speaking of the deer being the star of the show, so you mentioned the photography with the deer up close. Was that the video that's played during the show, the B-roll of different deer in the snow? And, there's always some really awesome shots.
Now, David Gillane, he's our executive producer today, and his team, they get a lot of that. The stuff that originated was from Charlie Alsheimer.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And Charlie had a 200-acre research facility. He didn't kill any of the deer. Some of those bucks that you see were 18, 19. He had them all named. There was Aaron, and there was his doe was named Carla after his wife. 18, 19-year-old deer. And he had those things, and it kind of shatters some people's perceptions, but he would have them trained like dolphins. He could shake a thing of corn, and he was old school, man. He was sitting there with a Nikon 35 millimeter camera, laying on the ground with his ball cap turned backwards. The fence is where you are, Seth, and a barbed wire fence, and he'd shake it, and then and here comes a deer, boom, and it basically jumped right on top of him to come there. But what he did is he researched browse preference. So he would go out and get all sorts of different native browse species. His buddy, Paul, I hope you're watching this, Paul, because this would be awesome for you. I know this is a badge of honor. Paul was one of his best friends. But Paul worked for the highway department over there in Bath, New York, and they would cut down, silver maple and whatever. I'm trying to think of like beech and all sorts of different berry brush. And they had these like little things with C-clamps, and they put that through the fence. And then Charlie would study what the deer ate at what different times of the year. And he did some fascinating articles on it.
That's huge.
And he did that, and he did his lunar study stuff. People tried to poo-poo that. And the thing about, I don't want to go off on a huge, because we could talk all day on this, but
yeah,
his lunar stuff, people think, the moon has nothing. It wasn't the moon. It was it was the moon, but it's way deeper and in depth than that. He had tens of thousands of entry points on this. And it was the gravitational pull, which fishermen know because they use it for their lunar tables of when fish are biting. But it was always based off of that second full moon after the autumnal equinox in September. And he didn't figure that out. The Native Americans figured that out hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, that there was something to, and that's why they called it the harvest moon, the hunter's moon, all that stuff. There was something to the moon, and people in not wanting to process when I say the science, because I don't get, it kind of blows my mind. It has something to do with the gravitational pull now, is it going to be like 20 days difference? No. And any whitetail hunter knows that some years that rut is really rocking, like up by us. It's really rocking right around Halloween, end of October. Other years, it's like November 7th or 10th. And it's like, why is that? So Charlie, he studied it with Wayne LaReche. Wayne was he was the game commissioner for Vermont, but he was a fisheries biologist. And that was his expertise. He went, that's what he went to school for. But Wayne said, I think there's some kind of connection. And Charlie says, I do too. We want to try to figure it out. But that's my long-winded way of saying, he not only had, his thirst for knowledge was unmatched by anybody I ever known. He really loved whitetails. He wanted to know what made him tick. Not only, the breeding stuff is cool because that's when we hunt.
Yeah.
But Charlie's thing too was like fawning dates, was overwinter habitat. I could get geeky for you guys if you want me to. Overwinter habitat, and that was with the browse. So if nutrition levels are at a certain level, if it's bad in winter, that the fawn's condition when it's born is going to be different, and that all ties back to when that thing was conceived. So there's dates there. So all that kind of stuff together ties together into some more fascinating things.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
The amount of science that goes into it just blows my mind, because a lot of us grew up, I would assume, in the exact same way, where it's hunting season, we're going hunting, and you go out in the woods and sit in a tree stand or do whatever, and that's just what you do, but you have no idea any of this stuff's going on, and then you try to be a little bit more educated and learn more, and in some people's case, you get a chance to really manicure a property to hunt, and there's so much to wrap your head around.
The Hornady CX Copper Alloy Expanding Bullet. CX bullets feature the advanced heat shield tip that resists aerodynamic heating and provides a consistently high BC. Hard-hitting and deep penetrating, CX bullets are constructed of rugged monolithic copper alloy that retains 95% or more of their original weight for devastating terminal performance. Available in factory-loaded ammunition as well as component bullets for reloaders. CX bullets from Hornady.
Another good parallel is, Seth, I'm gonna pull out one of your ammo boxes here because I learned this today. So me, being the average guy, see if I can get this open without killing your box. The average guy today, and that's me, pull that bullet out, I put it in my gun, boom, I shoot a deer with it, cool. And the parallel I'm going to give you, my dad was a carpenter.
Yeah.
And he was very, very skilled. And he's still around, but he's retired, he's 88 years old. We would bust our butts in an old farmhouse, ripping out a window, and then they wanted a big bay window. And it took us, say, a whole week to figure out he'd have to get everything square, get it in there. Okay, now you got it in there. Now you got to put the trim back on. And invariably, the homeowner would come in at the end of the week and like, nice, must have been a lot of work. And that's how it is with me with this bullet. Boom, I shoot the deer with it, Well, you guys just gave me a tour for like the last 8 hours, showing me how many processes went into making this bullet.
Right.
And it's the same thing with deer. It's like that deer walks out and it does what you think it's supposed to do and you shoot it. I don't want to say you got lucky, but it was like you don't understand what just happened.
Nope. I think a lot of us don't.
You don't understand what it took, not only just why it did that, but how did that buck, who's now a 150-inch buck, grow and survive for the past 4 or 5 years to get to this point to now I'm just taking, so, he's got decent mass, he's got weak twos.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, do you know why he's got weak twos? He probably had bad nutrition last winter.
Yeah.
Or do you know why this happened? Or do you understand that this thing had to evade coyotes and black bears and wolves and whatever
else
for the past 5 years to get in front of you? That is like a mind-blowing moment.
Yeah, that is wild. The thing it makes me think of, and I don't know if this is relatable to deer on the antler growth side of things. I'm sure it is, maybe just not quite as noticeable. But when we were out in Utah,
the elk,
and they were talking about the elk, on a wet spring, the elk will have these long, nice fronts on their antlers,
or they'll finish
and
on
then,
their
and then
their
in
back
the
forks.
fall, say it gets dry, or not in the fall, but in the summer to late summer it gets dry. Well, the tops of their antlers, the ends are shorter because just those different times of climate that they're dealing with and what vegetation's around, water or whatnot. But the rack kind of changes throughout the year, and if it's wet the whole year long, well, they're gonna have
they're gonna finish nice and have those.
I didn't even know
walks.
that about elk. I learned something.
We don't
about
know
elk
that
now.
either, but that's what
we
one
were
of the
talking with the
land
biologists
manager,
out there, and that's what he was kind of saying. And then when we were there, I think it just so happened to be a late summer or a wet summer, and it was getting later in the summer, so he was.
They were all excited.
happy.
Yeah, they're gonna finish great.
They're gonna be
That
some big elk.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
The other thing we do a little series online. They call it "Give Me One Random Whitetail Fact of the Day," and these guys ambush me in my office when I'm not expecting. But some of the things kind of similar. Now that would be probably a environmental thing that you talk about. But some of the things that really fascinate me are, like I said, I'm a Christian. I believe in everything the good book tells us. However, I do believe in evolution because we know through science and research that the whitetail evolved, which just blows my mind. And elk are the same way. They came up from a land bridge from South America, 3,000 or no, it was more than 20,000 years ago. And when you see all these, it's like 19 or no, there's not. There's 32 different subspecies of whitetails.
Wow.
So from Canada all the way down to the little Florida Keys and stuff. But in this area and west, now elk are different, but the blacktails, they migrated south. Whitetails migrated north, and then mule deer are a result of that migration.
Met in the middle.
Right. But when you look at that, it was like these. Now those were conditional factors over generations. And to me, that just more than reassures, I am Charlie always said, you are a small link in an incredibly long chain.
Yeah.
And he said, try to figure out how that chain works, and you're going to be a much happier person. And that's what it does for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna set up a hypothetical for you. We're gonna put knowledge to the test here a little bit. So,
I'm in trouble.
Nebraska, that's where we're at. We've got a pretty diverse opportunity to hunt here in that you've got really rough canyon country up in the northwest. You've got these big sprawling sandhills. You've got traditional river bottom type places. So for what I'm going to call us on the Great Plains, and then when you get into traditional Midwest and in the South where you're focused on whitetail deer, so you got September, October, November, December to hunt, depending on the season and stuff. November, for us, our rifle season is generally right around the rut. So that's a no-brainer. Not super difficult to hunt deer. September, October, and December now, that can change the game a little bit harder to figure things out. You go hunting in November, deer are running amok.
Yep.
They don't care about nothing. And they're just running. It's crazy. But early season or really late season, I'm curious, with all that you've learned, maybe break it down by month or by temperature range or however you want to. But September, what are some of the things you've learned that help you be successful in that early season? And that transitionary period in October, obviously the rut. And then in that late season, what are some of the things you focus on from a behavior standpoint?
From a behavior standpoint and you said the magical word, it's all transitions.
Okay.
And the transitions, so your rut, and I do know that, is mostly November rut,
Mhm.
right? So that one you can basically take that and set that aside because you know pretty much how that's going to go.
Mhm.
But the transitions are. I'm going to give you 3 layers to transitions. The biggest one that most guys will understand, and I'm not saying you can't understand all of them, but they get a little bit more tricky, are the food transitions. So out here you have a lot of egg.
Mhm.
You know, you probably don't. You have some mass, but not a lot. I'm sure there's probably some. I don't know. You probably have some oaks
Yep.
and things like that. And people, that's the big thing for deer hunters is in the South, it's way different. South, they've got like way many different species of white oaks and red oaks. And when those things are dropping, they've got soft mass, which is persimmons and in grapes and stuff like that. Up by us, we have apples. That's a transition. So for the early season hunter, those food transitions, whether it's going from, alfalfa or soybeans to whatever, if it's rye or if it's whatever else the farmer has planted, or if you've got food plots, those transitions are fairly easy for a hunter to figure out.
Okay.
As far as if you want to be successful from a food transition, that would be early season. You get to late season, December, he who has the food has the deer. So it's like if you're not supplementing it, then you're beholden to what does this land have? Is there leftover egg? Most of the times there are. And then you've got to figure out and that's basically just good scouting. You know,
Mhm.
you can do that off of cameras or even observations. The other transitions are much more subtle, but once you figure them out, it's pretty fascinating. So bear with me here because I'm going to get geeky. There's 2 things, life in the male society, life in the female society. With whitetails, no matter where you hunt in North America, they live in segregated groups for the most part. Now, those bucks and does will obviously interact with each other, and the rut's going to be a much easier time to do that. But I'll start with the doe society. Is whitetail does, and this does not apply to mule deer, it's different. Whitetail does live in maternally linked groups. So what we know is, and we always say in square miles to try to make it easier to understand, but when I say a square mile, it's not necessarily a square mile.
Right.
It's approximately 640 acres is approximately a buck and a doe's home range. So for all things being equal, for the most part of the year, if there's 640 acres of good habitat, whether that's a square or whether it's a long river bottom or it's snakes or whatever, it's a chain, for the most part, they're going to stick within that. We know, especially out here, bucks will travel 4, 5, 10 miles during the rut.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, you can't count that. But as a deer gets older, let me stick to the females. When I say maternally linked groups, if you took circles and drew them on a map, those does are going to live in those. So you say, I saw 10 does. Well, those 10 does are, for all intents and purposes, related.
Mm-hmm.
And across that habitat, you're going to have aunts and nieces and great aunts and great grandmas of does living together. But how they segregate themselves is no different than people living in a big city. So the oldest mature does that are the best mothers get the high rent spots. They get the good spots. The lower age class deer, especially when we fracture those systems by heavy doe harvests. So if you have yearling, which is 18-month-old does and younger 2.5-year-old does, they're going to get the low rent areas. So they're going to get the really marginal habitat. So if you're looking at in September, for example, and you're seeing a lot of yearling does, that should be indicating to you that this is a low rent area of the habitat for some reason.
Okay.
And that's how these deer are going to, that's how that transition goes for the food sources. Now, I'm not saying that's not 100% because they move. Now let's switch. I could talk for days on it. To the buck segment, a little bit different. So the doe, as she gets older, that home range shrinks to, let's just say approximately, depends upon where you live. If you're far west, not quite applicable. Here, depends on your habitat. Midwest, Northeast, East, Southeast, 100% applicable. The bucks, as they get older, that home range shrinks even more. And that's why you see these guys like Lee Lakoski, Pat Reeve, some of these guys that are just growing giant bucks in Iowa. And like, he's only got 400 acres, but they get the deer to 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. That buck knows where he's safe, where he's got cover, he's got breeding opportunities, and that could be a very small home range of 80 to 100 acres. So now going to your point, how do I hunt that deer in early season? Now we're talking bucks because everybody likes to hunt big bucks. That big buck, as we know, you get to bow season, your odds pretty good, right? So you got a camera out there, you've been getting them in your food plot or wherever regularly. You better make hay pretty quick. Because as we know, if you don't, you're not going to see him. And you're going to think, oh man, that buck disappeared. He didn't disappear. He knows every blade of grass in that core area of his home range. But now he's transitioning. He's transitioning from basically late summer behavior, late summer home range, it's not dispersal, home range occupation, to the rut where now he's feeling his oats. He's that 22-year-old guy hitting all the bars, wanting to get the prettiest girl. That all ends. We get to late season. We get to December. How do I hunt that deer? Number one, food. Number two, I should know his core range of his home range. And if I do, that's where my stands have already been set up 6 months ago. And then you try to catch him in between transition areas. And that's the hardest thing for most people to understand, is that they just want to put that stand, I'm on the food plot, I'm going to see deer. Got to get off there, and not the main trails, I call them the tertiary trails. You want to get on those little travel corridors, coming two bedding, two feeding, or one way or the other, and trying to get them there. And that's where that mental mind game comes into. I hope that answers your question.
It does.
Do you play into the previous year's history, trail camera history? Do you
Yes, absolutely. Because that really helps you hone. Steve taught me this. He's a master at it, because let's face it, I'll shoot the first good buck I see. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me.
Guilty here.
Yeah.
It seriously doesn't matter to me. But Steve uses that intel like, okay, now I'm really honing in what I think is the core of his preferred home range during fall. And that's where that comes into play. Yeah. And that's the things where you should be taking notes. And guys are really good. And there's guys out there, like I said, they want it way more than I do. They get really geeked, and that's awesome. That's what makes it so fun. But to me, it gets to be, been doing it for so long. It's like, yeah, I find it cool, but I still want to just enjoy the hunt.
Absolutely.
But to answer your question, yes. I mean, that's where that last year's intel is going to help you, and especially if you're one of these people who's blessed to be able to hunt a property like that you can actually track a buck.
Yeah.
The next year's should be even better. And guess what? Deer are a lot like turkeys. There's a definite pecking order. So I don't know if you guys do you want to raised on a farm with chickens?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You kill a rooster, you kill a wild turkey, there's another one to come in and take their place. And it's the same thing with deer. So you figured out that buck, and it's like, oh man, my neighbor killed him. Crap, I've been trailing this thing for 4 years or 3 years. But it's like, no, you just figured out what he was doing. But now there's going to be another one that's going to take his place. And I can almost guarantee you those habits are going to be very, very similar.
Interesting.
Very, very similar.
This has me thinking about something that I heard on another podcast that I listened to. And I'm by no means anywhere near this level. But it was a land manager who's got a piece of property that he's managed for 30 years. And he's got it dialed in to the point where, he's got the genetics on his farm that he wants to try to keep any new young button buck, he wants to keep it there because it potentially has genetics of, what he's trying to chase, big antlers. And he talked about how does, will potentially, they run their bucks off, their fawns, their buck fawns. He thought that maybe, they run those bucks off. So it kind of breeding wise, through nature, it pushes that buck out to a different area. So he had 2 does, I think, this last fall, or maybe this last fall, he had 2 does that had twin buck fawns, and he was targeting those does to keep those bucks on his farm. Is there something like that?
Well, I
was just curious on your take. I heard that, and I've never thought about that before.
I could spend the rest of the week talking about this. Okay, so let me first say his approach isn't 1,000% wrong. There are studies that show an orphan buck fawn will stick closer to his home range for a year and a half. Well, a year and a half, he's like this. After that, he's gone. He will disperse, number one. So you're not going to keep that buck around. The odds of you keeping him around until he's 4 or 5 years old are very, very small. The other thing about that is, gosh, how do I tackle this? In a lot of the scientific studies, the genetics up to 60% or more is related to the doe.
I've heard that.
So the buck genetics is not really a thing.
Yeah.
It's not like, well, it's the same with cows, and you guys are in beef country. That's a lineage that it's every bit as much as the female is the male. Also, depending upon where you live, and this comes down to age structure and sexual dimorphism, which is how many females versus males on the landscape. A preponderance, or I shouldn't say a preponderance, a percentage, which could be up to 25 or 30% of newborn buck fawns were sired by buck fawns. So, or yearling bucks. So you have, people think, the common thinking was, I want this big, mature 4 or 5 year old buck doing all the breeding. Well, he's got the same genetics as that little 6-month-old buck fawn. Sorry to tell you, but he does. And it's not the same. Like mule deer are more of a harem animal. Whitetails, that mature buck, I don't know, you see a breeding party, we call it. There's a buck chasing this doe and you're running her ragged during the rut. He breeds her. He gets his eye off her for 5 minutes and chases another buck out of there. Yearling buck comes in, breeds her. There is a high preponderance of multiple paternity in whitetails. So when you have a whitetail that has twins, there's a high percentage that those twins have 2 different fathers.
Interesting.
So to try to manage that on a wild, free-ranging herd is next to impossible.
Yeah.
So I would say, I mean, like I said, no offense to your friend. Like I said, what he's doing, yes, there's validity to if you orphan a buck fawn, he will stick closer. He's not going to, I'm not going to say not always. The chance of him being there when he's to the size where that guy wants to shoot him are going to be small.
Yeah.
Or the neighbor's going to kill him.
Yeah.
Of
course.
The best thing you can do if you want to manage deer is keep your population at a level below carrying capacity, which, again, for all intents and purposes, no matter where you live, is less than 35 deer per square mile, which is not a lot of deer. I always say when people figure out what 35 deer per square mile is, they think you killed every deer in the world. That's number one. Number two is really working on your habitat. So if you can do that through, depending upon how much land you own, I own 9 acres, but I mean, I've helped people manage land. But if you have a big chunk of land that's forest management, that could be burning, that could be vegetation control as far as getting rid of non-native species. It could be planting food plots. But when you're planting food plots, if you want to do it from a habitat perspective, it's not measured in half acres and quarter acres. It's measured in, because a quarter acre food plot is a Snickers bar for a deer herd. It's you need, and if you don't have that, fine. But there could be other ways of doing it. If you've got farm crops and you could leave 20 acres of standing corn or soybeans, that's going to actually help the deer.
I was going to say it. My brother-in-law had brought this up. This is years ago, but some of the best things that he thought you could do for land or food plots was to let ryegrass get to 5 foot tall and never cut it down.
Yeah.
And just give them a place to live once the crops come out.
That's actually not a bad idea.
Yeah.
It's actually not a bad idea at all.
That's interesting. I've learned so much in the time that we've been talking. I do want to transition, though, because we could go on. Obviously,
absolutely,
your depth of knowledge on this is incredible, and we have to have you back on the podcast for sure.
Absolutely.
When we get closer to whitetail season, we could do a whitetail month or something based on this, because I know Judd's chomping at the bit. Judd's got a little section that he gets to hunt and has spent a lot of time and effort in that place, and I know he takes it very serious. But I want to transition to rifle hunting, because that's, shotgun, muzzleloader, rifle. But rifles a lion's share of what we see of whitetail hunters, certainly here and to the east of us. So from your viewpoint, we talked about it before we started recording. You've got a rifle in your hands. You've got a deer. What are you thinking as far as shot placement goes? And maybe before you get there, what are you looking for a cartridge selection? Because it's not that hard to kill an animal of that size with the appropriate bullet and cartridge combination. But what's your opinion on that?
Sure. No, it's a good question and a loaded question for me. Number one, to address on the thing, I'm a big bow hunter.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people in the industry, that's all they care about is bow hunting or crossbow hunting. Gun hunting is the big hammer for whitetails in America. And without gun hunters and gun hunting opportunities, we would not get to do this. So if you are, well, anybody listening to this podcast is, I'm sure, a gun hunter. But I think people should not be divisive in the fact that you hunt with a bow, you shouldn't be able to hunt with a cross. We're all in this together. Embrace it and embrace anything your state comes down with. If they're coming down with extra muzzleloader seasons or a straight wall cartridge season or whatever.
Crossbow during archery.
Crossbow during archery. I support it all.
Yeah.
I support it all. And my theory on that is if I was king, which I never want to be, but if I was king of the whitetail world in America, I would make all states implement, this is deer season. Okay, you tell me what the parameters are. September 1st to December 31st? No, we don't want that. October 1st to January 1st. Whatever it happens to be, that's your season. Here are your tags. Knock yourself out. Do whatever you want. That's what I would say. I wouldn't care when you went bow hunting or gun hunting. That's what I would do. So
Well, to jump in there on a quick tangent, you're talking about some of the divisiveness as far as gun hunting goes. I think one thing that's often overlooked is as members of society in these civilized areas, we have an obligation to keep deer numbers at a certain level, because if we don't, they'll do it themselves, and it's not usually pretty.
And it's not going to be pretty. The deer have to die.
Mm-hmm.
Ted Nugent, that's Ted's quote. I'm going to give him. The deer have to die.
Right.
But to answer your question, whitetails out there, I'm gun hunting. What do I want to do for shot placement? For me, it all depends on my situation. So if I'm at home, I'm hunting 9 acres at home or 20 acres at home. Back home, if you have 40 acres, you're a big landowner. If you have 100 acres, you're a really big landowner. And there's a lot of other landowners. So when I talk about that magical square mile for deer population, that square mile could literally have 300 or 400 landowners.
Jeez.
So what I'm doing as a gun hunter in that situation is I'm aiming for the brachial plexus. I'm aiming for the center of the shoulder blade, because unless I know my neighbors and they say, yeah, if you shoot a deer, you don't even have to ask, go get it. Most places of, Wisconsin or Michigan or Pennsylvania or New York or Georgia or Alabama, the big populated deer hunting states, you know how people are, they're very protective. So you can't trail. So one thing I know through deer anatomy, if I can center punch that, we call it the high shoulder shot, I'm anchoring that deer right there. Am I blowing out shoulders and losing maybe 6 to 8 pounds of meat, even if I blow out both shoulders? So be it. I'll shoot another deer.
Yeah.
That's my shot placement of choice. If I'm hunting and I don't have to worry about that, I'm aiming just like what I would for a bow.
Right behind the shoulder.
Right behind the shoulder, right through both lungs, preferably through the ribs. I'm not blowing a lot out of there. For bullet choice, I've used your guys' stuff, obviously, for the TV show for 19 years. I've used some of the copper loads. I've used these things. The bullets got to have that, and I know you guys do it, and you guys can refresh my memory on the technology, but that bullet that's got the basically the delayed expansion, it's staying intact, the weight retention is there.
Yep.
Because when I drive that into one of those shoulders, if that thing blows apart, oofta.
Yeah.
I've got whether I'm doing it or my buddy who's a retired butcher is doing it. Now we're picking stuff out of the meat, and I don't want to grind it because I'm going to wreck my grinders, things like that. But just from a humane perspective, I want a bullet that's going to, number one, be accurate.
Yeah.
And I do that with, since you guys came up with these polymer tip bullets.
Yeah, the SST, the ELDX, the CX, for example.
No, I've shot them. Those I shot particularly out of my 20 gauge slug gun.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually had a 12 gauge too. I had a 12. I switched to a 20. And my muzzle loaders. Those were game changers for me.
Yeah.
And most of those shots with slug guns and muzzleloaders were through the ribs, boiler room shots. But what I liked about that was, and I'm not naming any other ammunition companies, but I've shot some of the smaller caliber ones.
Sure.
And I didn't have blood trails. They were horrible. And that's a pit in your stomach when you shoot a deer with a gun, especially a slug gun. And I'm on my hands and knees looking for blood. Not a good sign.
Nope.
For a rifle, I'm not. I grew up in the upper Midwest, so I'm not. I've made some longer shots, but for me, it's all about that bullet design. And for most of my rifle hunting, has been anchoring that deer on the spot.
Yep,
and,
right through the shoulder.
And like I said, I think we were talking off air about this, but the biggest thing for any deer hunter to get, if you're not really maybe experienced with it, archery equipment, and I include all archery, recurves, compound bows, crossbows, that kills via hemorrhaging. That's like, I'm actually on blood thinner, so if I cut myself shaving, I bleed like a stuck pig. It just bleed. That's what you want in archery equipment.
Right.
That's going to cut immediately. That deer is going to bleed out quickly, and it's going to fall within, well, we already know that. So a deer's got to lose, here's another geeky thing for you. A deer's got to lose about 30% of its blood volume before it collapses from archery wound. And that's like about 3 of these.
Okay.
But they said, well, I didn't find that much blood on the ground. Well, it's internal.
Right.
So it's bleeding like crazy. With a bullet, as you guys know, it's completely different. A bullet kills via shock in hemorrhaging, but the shock is, whoosh, you hit that in, and I think you see it with your ballistic gel.
Yeah.
So when you shoot, I keep talking about that shoulder blade shot. When you shoot in there, my goodness, it's trauma.
Yeah, it is.
Like I said, you're peeling off a whole shoulder. You might be throwing it away. You shoot them through the lungs. It's going to have that big
temporary wound cavity.
Yep, and you will be losing that meat. But that's what I want to happen because I know that he's down. Whether he falls, like if I center punch that brachial plexus, that big nerve bundle that's all coming in right in here, it's going to happen to you too. If I did it to you, you're going to fall. Any animal's like that. It's like that central. I call it the boiler. It's like you turned off your furnace and now, boom, he's down. If I don't and I come close to it, that wound channel is still big enough that's going to disrupt it. And we see that from spine shots. Yeah. Like if you hit a spine shot, you might not actually be severing that spinal cord, which is only that big. But let's say my bullet, okay, so that's the spinal cord. The spinal column is here, and that bullet hits one of those fins below that, and woof, he goes down. Same thing.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm looking for in my bullet. My bullet's got to have that shock and awe factor.
Absolutely.
And I know you can tell me why that happens.
Yeah.
I don't know why it happens.
Sure.
I mean, as far as how those things are loaded, the design of the bullet, how it reacts.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that does come down to the design of the bullet. You get that expansion, that rapid expansion. And I say rapid, not to say that the bullet's coming apart, because there's mechanical means often to hold that bullet together. But you get that violent expansion, it's transferring energy, and particularly in the high shoulder shot, when you get that boom, light switch, animal falls right away, you disrupt the central nervous system electrical activity, so it goes unconscious, which appears like it's dead. Now, there is a difference, clinical death and brain death. So it appears dead. Technically, it does still have to die via lack of oxygenated blood to the brain, but it will die from the same mechanism of as an archery shot. It's just the lack of oxygenated blood, but it loses consciousness much quicker, which for all intents and purposes is as good as dead, because if it's unconscious and can't move and bleeding out at such an incredible rate, the exception to that would be like elk, for example. You've seen elk get walloped, shut the central nerve, or not shut it off, but flash it, they lose consciousness, they hit the ground, but they're such a robust animal with so much blood volume, they can actually get back up.
And that's a difficult
job. But on a deer-sized game, you put one through the shoulder, disrupt that central nervous system, the electrical activity, you can shut them off, they're unconscious until they're technically brain dead.
Until they're dead. Or the other thing too that I don't like to take chances, whether it's a bow or a gun, that deer goes down, I say shoot it again.
Oh,
shoot again. Put one through the lungs, or stay on it until you get up there. And that's always I think a fail-safe way of
Oh, sure. But that methodology is, for states that have traditionally smaller tracts of land, like you mentioned Pennsylvania, which has historically got
a lot of hunters.
smaller tracts, a lot of hunters. It happens out west. My dad and I were out west in western Nebraska, hunting in the Sandhills, hunting on a public property, thousands of acres, and the shot opportunity, 451 yards. I mean, you could almost spit across the fence line into private property. That one wasn't that close. It was another 25 or 30 yards to the fence line. But you got one shot, and old man, you better put it through his shoulder.
Count.
You got to make it count.
And he put one squarely through the shoulder, and the deer dropped right where he stood.
And I know it's controversial with some people. Some people get all over me on that.
Sure.
They're like, well, that's not responsible. I'm like, you have to make that decision in the heat of the moment. I can't, and of course, I can't sit here from a table and say your situation should dictate this, but that's something that you think about.
Yeah.
And I think as a hunter, if you go in there with that in the back of your mind, you're going to be able to make a much more ethical decision.
I think so. Well, and there's a lot that goes into it, the ethics, and then, I'd rather, like you mentioned, I'd rather feed 6 pounds of bloodshot meat to my dog than have him jump that fence into thousands of acres of private property where the landowner lives in, 3 states away, and I have no idea how we're going to figure this out. Rather,
I don't know how it works here, but where I'm from in Wisconsin, Minnesota's different. You can't trespass and you cannot claim ignorance. You have to know where the lines are.
Oh, yeah.
You can't say, oh, well, I thought, nope, wrong story. And it used to be a felony. It's not anymore. It used to be felony.
Wow.
For trespassing. It's not anymore, but still, I'm not taking that chance.
Yeah.
I'm not
100%.
taking that chance because you know how people spend money for land these days. I won't want it. I won't want people traipsing all over my land.
Not interested in that.
So that is I know it's a controversial thing, but also it's but if all things are perfect, yeah, heck yeah, right behind
Right through the lungs, make it perfect.
right through the lungs. And I think we could take a pencil and probably kill no, but I mean it's like the physics is going to be much cleaner that way.
Sure. Yep.
Out here, you may only get one chance. So never compromise. At any distance. Match accurate ELDX bullets, highest BCs, flat trajectories, and unparalleled terminal performance at all practical ranges. Precision Hunter ammunition from Hornady.
I'd like to transition one last time here. I've got another question for you for the end of the podcast.
Okay.
But, we talked about the smaller tracts of land in states, eastern Nebraska, a lot of the eastern states, places like where Judd gets to hunt, for example. He's got this, it's not huge property, but he spent a lot of time manicuring it. If you get access onto private property and you've got this relatively small chunk, let's say less than 80 acres?
Well, yeah, the chunk that I get to hunt is a little different. Yeah.
I was just trying to bring up, if you've got, say, less than 80 acres, what are some things that you would do from a food plot standpoint and from a land management standpoint that you think would help the hunter? And everybody wants to shoot a big rack, but let's transition away from antler size and say a deer that's reached 4 to 5 years old.
Okay.
To find a deer in some of the parts of the country that have reached that level of maturity is really tough to do because a lot of 3.5-year-old bucks get killed. So if you're hunting on a smaller piece, what are some things that you can do from a food plot and land management standpoint that you think will help you see more or retain more of those animals?
Of those older age class animals?
Yeah.
Okay, this is the one that I don't
or more animals in general.
Well, that's two answers. I'll address it from because like you said, let's face it, everybody wants to shoot a big buck, right?
Sure.
So that one I grapple with internally a lot because to do that, let's just use that 80-acre perspective. So I already told you how deer live on the landscape from a male and female perspective. Yep. If I am from those, that's my goal is to kill a 4 or 5-year-old buck minimum. And what can I do to the land? Number one, the access is going to have to be really limited.
Okay. Just people presence.
1 or 2 guys, that's it.
Yep.
1 or 2 hunters, and that's it. if that's what your goal is. You really have to pick and choose how you hunt it and when you hunt it. So less is more. So that goes to this whole scouting thing and to only hunting a stand when it's perfect. And like on an 80-acre parcel, if I was doing it just, and I don't do that, these guys can attest to it, I don't do it that way, but if I was doing it, I would have at least a dozen, if not more, stand sites. At least. For every possible wind direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I am not hunting that stand unless I don't care. I use all the products. I use all the scent killer sprays and soaps and everything, and they work great.
Yep.
I even use the mock scrapes and stuff like that. But we are constantly emitting scent, and a buck that of that age, of 4 years old, 4.5 years old, he's mature. He will figure it out like you will not believe so fast that you're trying to hunt him. So if I'm doing that, when I hunt and what stands I use is going to be very, very well thought out. From a food perspective, the second thing is if I'm hunting for a big buck, I'm doing doe management, but I have to figure out, that's something I'm going to have to figure out how many does I'm taking off of that. And in that scenario, I'm not killing does until the very last part of the season, probably during gun season. I hopefully have already shot my buck by then. And that's where I'm doing my doe management. I'm not doing my doe management early. I will not be doing it if I'm hunting for a mature buck. Because once you do that, number one, if you have a really good mother, that's the doe you want around during the rut. So I'm not killing her in September. I am a hypocrite that way because where I hunt, I will kill the first big doe I see. She's going in the freezer always. So, but I don't normally do this. The other thing I'm doing from a food perspective, this one I've changed my thoughts on over the years, because back in the day, it's like I'm packing as much food on that 80 acres as possible. Because as Steve says, you want those deer to spend a disproportionate amount of time on your ground. So if you only have 80 acres, you're trying to put everything on. You're putting everything on that coffee table. You're putting Doritos and deer sausage and snack sticks, and you're watching a football game. That's what you're trying to do on that 80 acres. I won't do that anymore. What I will do is there's going to be very good variety, and it's going to be spaced out to get the deer to move through that property. So on my little property that I have now, I've planted hazelnuts, and I've planted apple orchards, and I've got food plots, but they were so staggered throughout that property that my goal in that situation is to have, in a perfect year, food coming into ripeness throughout the hunting season, so that's going to give those deer more reasons why they want to come through my property. So that's what I'd be doing. So I'd be looking at that as like almost like a battle map. Like what I want to do is, I know the neighbors have a good bedding area here, and this neighbor might have a swamp that nobody gets to hunt. So I want them going from there to here, coming through my property and spending as much time on there.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I got a 5-acre field, I'm going to plant it. Well, yeah, you can do that. There's nothing wrong with it. The other thing I should mention about food, which is really difficult, we just did a video on this yesterday at a property that we did for deer and deer hunting properties, is really hard to do this. This guy had 3 food plots of probably 3 acres or more on his, he had a big property, but beautiful former egg fields, and he planted them all in soybeans. And he goes, yeah, there's deer like crazy. I'm like, I would be taking some of these and having them completely as destination plots and never hunting over them. Maybe during gun season. That would be my exception. If I'm hunting during gun season, I'd hunt them. I would never touch them during bow season, because like I said, I want those deer spending a disproportionate amount of time on that land. I want them coming in there feeling safe, eating, never getting any human pressure there, and then going back into their bedding areas, and then trying to hunt them around the fringe areas if I can get in there with the wind. And I think if you do that, it totally goes against what you're thinking. Because most people, and granted, and that's why I don't do it, because even as much as I get to do this, I'm like, I don't want to stress this much. I just want to go out and enjoy it.
Yeah, and enjoy the hunt for sure.
And especially if you're saying it's just me or somebody else, well, I want to share it with my family or my kids or whatever. You can't. I'm not saying you're never going to kill a big buck doing that, but I know guys who take this approach that I just described, they'll kill a big buck every single year because they got it figured out. They've controlled the controllables, and they're getting those deer to come through that property, at a time, but they're only picking the right spots. It sucks because I've been in stands I get up there, wind's wrong, got to get out of here. Why? The wind is wrong. Well, just hunt anyway. No. If that big buck smells me once, is he going to run for the next county? No, but he knows where I'm at, and now it's going to be really that much more difficult to hunt him.
Sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that was
Log that away, Judd.
That was awesome to listen to. It kind of made me feel good that I'm halfway on the right track.
Yeah.
But
Well-
it's kind of neat. I was just thinking about my hunting property that I have permission to hunt on, and a lot of the similar thought process goes through my head. So
Yeah.
that's kind of neat.
We'll have to have, like I said, we need to get Dan back on for episodes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of maybe like I said, we get closer to hunting season. We could do like
Absolutely.
a whitetail special for a month or something, because we've been over an hour here talking now, so we'll have to wrap this up. But before we do,
Sure.
Dan, we got to know, if you had to pick one cartridge and one bullet to shoot for the rest of your life, what would you pick?
It would be this one right here. It would be the American Whitetail. Oh, man.
Ooh.
It'd be the Precision Hunter 6.5 Creedmoor.
Precision Hunter, 6.5 Creedmoor,
Yeah.
can't go wrong.
Yeah, I've shot them both, but that thing is pretty darn.
Yeah,
It makes me look good.
yeah, it's got a match-accurate bullet,
It makes me look good.
terminal performance to spare at any practical range, in a cartridge that's mild recoiling and just inherently accurate by nature of its design.
Yeah, it is. I mean, now I've shot the American Whitetail loads. I've shot those actually since. When did you guys come out with those? It was
2015.
2015. I shot those almost exclusively for. I shot a bunch of nice Nebraska bucks with that one, but this one I've shot. Now this one came out when again, the Precision.
2015.
Oh, they both came out at the same time.
Excuse me. Whitetail might have been 14.
This one came out
Right.
earlier.
Yeah.
This one I've shot the last 3 seasons, and maybe it's a combination though too. And I think Mark Kaiser actually, it was something he did for us. Well, he was shooting the bullet. I got the bullets. I shot them. They were very accurate. But then I teamed it with my rifle and my scope. And
From SIG.
Yeah, they're freaking awesome. I'm not the 500 or 600 yard guy, but
Yeah.
I've made several 350 yard shots with that thing where I was supremely confident.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not that way.
Confidence kills.
But I got that thing, exactly. I got that thing, I got that gun locked down. I'm like, I can totally take that deer.
Yep.
And boom, when you do that, it's just like an arrow. It's like, no, I'm not changing.
Yep.
So yeah, I'd have to pick the Precision Hunter.
Awesome. All right, log that one down. 6.5 Creedmoor Precision Hunter. A great choice, Dan. I got to commend you on that one. You
All
can't
right.
go wrong with that combination. So, Judd, any last questions for Dan while we got him here?
No, I don't think so. I just appreciated being the sponge here and taking it all in.
Yeah, that's
that
what I
was-
feel like. Yeah, Dan, can't thank you enough for coming on our podcast. And so for all the listeners out there that want to get engaged, you got Deer and Deer Hunting TV. You've got the Deer Talk Now podcast available wherever podcasts are found. In social media, Deer and Deer Hunting.
Social media, go to Pursuit Channel. Starting right here at the end of June, third quarter starts. David. Saturday Night Deer Camp on Pursuit, 2-hour block, anchored by the Deer and Deer Hunting TV show.
Okay.
Also, we have Modern Hunter. We've got we've got 4 TV shows, and then also on YouTube. It's YouTube.com/DDH Online.
Okay.
And you can watch Steve Bartelo's Grow 'em Big, Hunt 'em Big. We've got all sorts of. We've got like 25 or 3,000 videos up there that people can watch.
Excellent. Great resources all around. So people out there listening, jump onto that. Dan, Judd, thanks for the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Guys, hopefully you enjoyed this educational podcast. I know I certainly did. Judd was the sponge here as well. Great resource. Can't thank Dan enough for coming on and for sharing his knowledge. I promise you guys we'll get him back on the show. If you would like, comment, subscribe, please drop a comment. If you have questions for Dan, questions for us, hit us up at podcast@hornady.com, and we'll catch you on the next one.